Welcome to Projects, Play, and Pandemics, Creativity in COVID Times. We're going to spend the hour sharing with you what we've been up to creatively the past few months. Hopefully that will inspire you to begin working on your own projects that you've been thinking about, or encourage you to pursue new skills during this time. The panelists will introduce themselves, and then we'll get started.
Hi, my name is Michelle Clough. I'm a writer and narrative designer with the outsourcing studio Talespinners, which does game writing and narrative design for various game companies and game studios. I'm also the co-founder and chair of the IGDA Romance and Sexuality Special Interest Group, which basically talks about romance games, sex games, and the developers that make them and enjoy them. So, yeah.
Great. I'm Stacy Mason. I'm an indie developer and narrative designer and researcher. And so I've previously worked at companies like Telltale, where I was the creative lead of the R&D group. I've also worked at places like Hangar 13, part of 2K Games, and then moved on to indie, where I worked at Sonderlust Studios, and am now starting my own team. I'm also finishing up a PhD in computer science with the Center for Games and Playable Media at UC Santa Cruz.
I'm Sharon Biswass. I'm an independent game designer, writer, and artist. I do mainly independent freelance work. I show in galleries and things like that. I work for clients, different kinds of clients, such as the Museum of the Moving Image. I made the Dark Crystal art for them, and Wizards of the Coast. I was part of the D&D Live design team this year, and other organizations. I am also on the faculty of computer science at Fordham, and I'm in the program. I'm in the faculty for the program of advanced photographic studies at Bard College.
I'm Symantha Reagor. My current day job title is that I am a senior content strategist, which sounds super impressive, but it's a fancy way of saying I copy and paste a lot of stuff and then tell people that I don't like things. I also am a freelance writer, copy editor, and diversity consultant, and I've published speculative poetry through Strange Horizons and Starline. And exciting news, my D&D group just passed our first year anniversary. So,
Yay! And I am Toiya Kristen Finley. I am a writer and editor in general. I also work in games as a game designer, narrative designer, game writer, editor, and diversity consultant. I have worked on everything from AAA to indie. I co-authored the book, The Game Narrative Toolbox, and I also contributed to and edited Narrative Tactics for Mobile and Social Games, Pocket-Sized Storytelling. So that's a little bit about us. So what have we been doing since the pandemic started? What new projects have you taken on?
Rob, you open your mouth first. You get to go.
I was assuming we're doing the same order, so I'm like, is Michelle going to start? I don't know.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess I could go first. So I'm probably a little bit different than everyone else on the panel in that my personal projects have been less personal projects and more sort of external-ish projects that have external deadlines, but that I've been kind of quietly putting off until COVID happened, and then I'm like, right, well, I guess now is the time to work on them. So one of the things I've been doing is I have been working on a book on how to write and design sex scenes in video games. That was something that had basically I'd been kind of like, oh, I'll get around to it at some point, and then COVID happened. It's like, well, I guess some point is now. And the other thing I've been doing that is sort of a personal project is an interactive fiction game with there's a company called Fable Labs that does sort of mobile interactive fiction, and I've been sort of basically I kind of got kickstarted with that, and it's been taking a while, but I've been working on that in my spare time. The other thing is that actually during COVID, I basically came back home to take care of my dad because he's needed a little bit of extra taking care of, and he started making a game in RPG Maker to like pass his time. So a lot of the times I'll be like at like, dinner, and suddenly he'll be like, I don't understand how this works. And then I'll sort of go over change a few variables, and then it will all work. And he's like, did you do it? What is this wizardry? And I'm like, that's why I get paid the big bucks. Please, will somebody pay me the big bucks? Oh yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh,
I was just going to say, the other thing that I've been meaning to get back to in terms of personal, like for fun projects, has been Dreams on PlayStation 4, which is a really good sort of like technically user-friendly, very powerful game creation tool. And they just released their VR set. So you can actually make and play VR games in it now. And I still kind of suck at Dreams, particularly in terms of art. But I'm like, I want to start making like VR spaces to hang out in, while I'm stuck inside during COVID. Sounds great. So yeah, that's what I've been up to.
Yeah, so I mentioned before that I'm putting together an indie team and also finishing up a PhD. And both of those are things that will kind of expand to fill the time that you give them, which unfortunately during COVID is all of the time. So I found myself a couple of months into shelter in place kind of realizing that I was working 110% of my time just because there was no real break between work and downtime for me. And a couple of my other writer friends found themselves in a similar position. And we were sort of lamenting the fact that we weren't really writing for fun anymore. And so we started a game jam, which we're calling the Fortnightly Fiction Jam. That's based around interactive fiction and story games. So it's kind of work on a different time scale as a hobby, but what it's done is sort of allowed me to tap into, some of the angstier feelings that I can't really put into my commercial work, and being able to have a creative outlet for that, while also growing a community that's really welcoming for people that have, for example, never made a game before, but are interested in trying out interactive fiction for the first time. So yeah, that's been really fun and honestly, low-key kind of keeping me sane during the quarantine. So yeah, that's what I've been up to mostly.
And I just now connected the dots as to who you are because of Fortnightly Fiction Jam. I'm like, I've been seeing that post in the Facebook group a lot, and I'm like, now that's you. So most importantly, I have been expanding my cooking skills a lot. I have cooked I have roasted more chickens in COVID than I have cooked any bird before COVID. Right? I have roasted 6 chickens so far. While in the past, I just roasted 1 chicken, 1 duck, and 1 goose. Right? So lots of new cooking things going on. I made cookies for the first time. I made brownies for the first time. It's amazing. But work is interesting for me, right? Because I keep hearing people say like, don't worry if you're not productive, treat yourself, it's fine. And I'm like, excuse me, I'm a freelancer. Daddy landlord needs me to be productive. So don't tell me all that, because all the people telling me that are salaried employees, right? Even if they're in the game world, all of them are like, oh, I'm drawing a salary. And I'm like, well, lovely, right? Right, exactly. So it is interesting. I know people who are watching this, you're going to be a range of people, right? I get infuriated when people are telling me it's okay. I'm like, honey, it's not. So, your anger is fine. So I have been, the main thing is we were heading into the publishing stage of my last co-edited book, which is Honey and Hot Wax, Anthology of Erotic Art Games. So that got into place, and a lot of that for me as co-editor has now been marketing. So I've been like reaching out to journalists and going on panels and talking to podcast interviews and blah 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 about this kind of topic. So that's been a big thing I've been doing, and I find that it's been a little harder for me to do creative work, and so balancing it out with this kind of thing has been really really good. So I've been doing a lot of that. However, I did just start a new project 2 weeks ago. So a co-editor and I, so this is Cleo Yansu Davis and I are partnering with Strange Horizons since Symantha mentioned that. So I'm going to be the co-editor of a special issue next year of interactive fiction about sex. So that we suddenly because Honey and Hot Wax ended, I literally called Cleo and I'm like, hey, remember this like tantalizing hint I dropped like months ago? Let's just make it happen now. And it's not because I have more time. That is actually not the case, because I'm a freelancer and this is similar, right? I might have more time in that I'm not doing my live work anymore. But like Stacy says, a lot of freelance work just fills the space you give it, right? I've also been doing course prep for fall because I have to change the way I'm teaching courses because now we're remote. So that was the one like big thing, and I think what's been making me do that well is working with other people. So that's nice. And I've also, of course, I keep picking up small commissioned work. A lot of small indie role-playing games like Jiangxi, Blood in the Banquet Hall just made like $100,000, right? But they during COVID, like Sharang, do you want to write for us a small thing? I'm like, sure. So I did a lot of these smaller things, which I think again are manageable because they feel bite-sized. I've actually been having a lot of trouble getting longer work done. I was working on a choice of game story and I just stopped, and I should email my editor and be like, I will start again, right? I just stopped. And also I'd been gearing up to go into the publishing phase for a number of LARPs. So I won awards for a couple of LARPs. I'm like, great, I'm gonna publish them. But a lot of them were like 10-person LARPs about death. Right? And I'm like, yeah, we're not going to publish that now.
Right.
Or another LARP which relies on you cuddling with someone else and shining flashlights in the environment. Not going to happen during COVID. So I had to mix those projects. So it's been interesting.
Yeah, it's listening to you guys talk about like filling all your time and doing all this stuff and being super productive. And I'm over here like, my personality, if you ask me what I've done during COVID, my first instinct is to be like, oh, I've done nothing. I've just, sat on the couch. I'm such a loser. I've done nothing. And I have to actually have other people outside of me go, no, sweetie, you've actually done a lot. Let's list it out. So like when Toiya, when you invited me to this and you're like, oh, you're working on that homebrew D&D thing. You should be on the panel. I was like, does that count?
I had exactly the same thing happen to me too. So
yeah, I think part of the reason why is that mentality of like, oh, you've got to be producing, you got to be putting stuff out there. What's your other side hustle? And I've been the last several years, my money situation has been so tight, and just before COVID hit, like I'm doing okay, money's fine. I finally moved my cat up here, like life is good. COVID. And so now I'm having to stop and relook at things and go, okay, I haven't been writing for myself, because when I think about sitting down to write my stories, I'm like, oh, but I'm not good enough. I don't want to sit down and start because then I'm going to show myself that I'm not good enough. And I don't want to see that. So I'm just not going to do that. I'm going to go work on something, not that. So it's been a process of stepping back and rediscovering how to have fun doing things. So taking a lot of the pressure off and finding, I found a great therapist right before COVID hit, and I'm bless her. So a lot of it has been like, okay, well, what do I actually need to feel safe being creative? And I discovered like, oh, I don't actually feel safe in big open spaces. And even though I live alone in my apartment, I have converted like the small hallway closet into a tiny little writing room. And that's what I'm like, this is comfortable for me. And I can like pretzel myself in there and I can write. That's apparently what my brain needed. And before COVID, I would have stopped and I would not have done that. I would have looked at myself like, you're crazy. People are going to think you're crazy. Don't do that. So really stopping to say, what do I need to feel comfortable, and what will bring me joy? So one of I think the weirdest things coming out of COVID, I actually enjoy localization. It can be really fun. It's my version of crossword puzzles. So I have started on my own localizing Japanese web novels. I run the Japanese script through a free translation software, and it comes back to me, and sometimes it's pretty good, and sometimes it's really not. And sometimes I have to cross-reference things with Google Translate, and Google Translate is not that good at all. And then I have to try to figure out, okay, what do they mean? And the fun part about localization is it's not a one-to-one translation. Localization is making it understandable for the audience. So sometimes that does mean changing the sentence around, because a proverb from Japan doesn't make sense to somebody who's, from California. So yeah, so that is my crossword puzzle, is now translating Japanese web novels. And you know what? That's what my brain needed. The other thing is I have started doing online digital art classes to get back into doing art. You can see I've got a painting there, but I don't know how to do digital art. So I am forcing myself to, I have decided, I picked a big project that I'm like, someday I want to do a webcomic. I have none of the skills. I have some of the skills. I have none of the skills needed for a webcomic. There is so much I would have to learn to get to a final webcomic stage. And having that be the project that I am working towards, I can come up with a list of all the skills that I need to learn. And it makes it seem less scary. And my final thing is, my extreme geeky thing is I've started a PowerPoint slide presentation to teach a friend all about Earth's geological time scale, because she needs to pick her favorite epoch. Mine is the Pleistocene.
And
yeah.
and as for me, I got into games 12 years ago because I wanted to make my own games. I started out as a writer of prose fiction, and I wrote my own novels and things like that. So I'm like, I'm going to make my own games. And then 12 years later, I had not made my own game yet. And so I had been preparing and thinking about a visual novel that I wanted to do and actually collaborate with people and find a way to pay them and all of that. And so then COVID hit, and people I wanted to work with, were free to work. In varying degrees, because people I wanted to work with were affected as well. So I am now working on my visual novel and collaborating with people. And because of where the different developers are right now in their own lives, I'm actually really working on the music right now with the composer, which is really, really awesome. And the programmer has basically put the bare bones infrastructure for the visual novel into the engine that we're using. So I'm really excited about that because it's been 12 years too long in the making. So both Symantha and Sharang touched on this about I've got to be productive, why am I not productive? Or figuring out what you need to do in order to be creative. So as Sharang mentioned, lots of people have responded to the pandemic in different ways. Some people just kind of want to be by themselves. Some people need to be with others. There's a lot of fear, which is okay because that's normal. We've never been through anything like this before. And when you have that kind of pressure, like you're fearful, you're anxious, it's really hard to be creative because it takes so much of your physical and mental energy that you need. So in the things that you've been exploring during this time, have you found that approaching something new has given you the inspiration to find that energy, or like Symantha said, figuring out, hey, I could make this space just for my writing room, has helped you to develop skills? What have you found has helped you to kind of be productive when you need to be?
I found Samantha's statement very resonant because Michelle's going to despair at me for saying this, but I have learned. So before the pandemic, I was never a reader of genre romance, right? I was not a romance reader. In fact, I confess I may have shared some of that misplaced disdain that some people have at genre romance, right? Which is a terrible thing, right? That's not a good thing to have. I was like, oh, romance, right? But then I was rewatching gay TV shows, the good ones, all these crappy ones, and I'm like, you know what? This is making me happy. I need more of this, and so I went into my New York Public Library app because it's been a lifesaver for me here. I've been getting every book I wanted on the New York Public Library app, and I'm like, I'm going to start reading gay romance stuff, and of course, the genre is enormous, and there's lots of really terrible stuff out there. So I've been sifting and winnowing and finding stuff, but I found that, reading gay romance isn't that bad, and romance writers are very talented people. And this has also been a new thing. I've been reading Archive of Our Own. So I've been going.
You've been reading the sacred text.
Right.
Sacred X.
I've been going into like queer/fan fiction on AO3, which again before this I would have been disdainful of. I mean. But right now, I'm like, well, actually, there are a lot of things going. Fanfics, a lot of interesting things happen. Like they do a lot of cultural work that's interesting, and also This important to me is it does a lot of cultural work for queer people who have outlets through this. And I was talking to a bunch of our other professor friends about like what is the role of fan fiction, and like in fact, it's easier to get into romance through fan fiction because you already have a predetermined relationship with the characters, and what does this mean? And I'm currently as in this weekend I'm watching stuff at the San Francisco Porn Film Festival, and watching that and thinking about that in terms of, okay, well, what is this doing? What is this doing? It's been really interesting, and that has actually been energizing me, and that's something that's been making me happy. And it just happens to be that I'm working on multiple sex-related projects right now. That I can say that all of this is research. Whether or not it is whatever, but I can tell myself, because we're in the Weberian aesthetic of like, if we are not working, we are not good people, right? The Protestant ethic and all that. So I can trick my brain into thinking I'm being productive, even though I don't believe that one's measure of value should be productivity. But I can trick myself into saying I'm being productive because I'm like, yes, I'm reading a sex scene in a book because I'm editing 2 anthologies about sex. I'm doing a panel tonight about sex. That's one thing.
Just to hit upon why my plan for this weekend is to play Return of the Obra Dinn and Edith Finch, because I'm like, yeah, totally research for a project.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's my excuse during Steam sales. I'm like, oh, but I'm narrative. I gotta buy these to know the story and see what narrative tricks they're using. Yeah.
Right. And even better, I write a lot of nonfiction, right? So if I watch or play something and then I can somehow fit a sentence about it into an article I'm publishing, I'm like, there, it was worth it. Guys, see? Eurogamer published this. It was totally worth it, right? So
Yeah.
One of my, I think for the rest of my life, one of my greatest achievements is I do the the gem store blog post for a game company, and I was able to work in scientific details about dinosaur tail and what the horns are called, the epinasal horns, and the thagomizers on the tail. I'm like, that went out, that's out there live, people read that. That's my geek all over that.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. The bits that I enjoy. So I'm a bit. Unfortunately, as I said, the personal projects I'm doing feel a little bit more kind of like there's a deadline. It feels a little bit more like an obligation as opposed to that fun thing I sit down to do on my spare time. But every time I get to a section where great, I now get to go on for 2 pages about the implications of fade to black sex scenes in games versus explicit sex scenes, and here's all these examples, and now I'm going to talk for 2 pages about this one scene in God of War, and I'm just like, apparently I'm getting paid for this. I don't know how. But I going off of something Sharang was saying, is for some reason the word popcorn came into my head. That sort of to a certain extent, before COVID, there's this element of everything we have to do has to be super serious. We have to be super productive. We have to be super do deeply meaningful things. And I think for a lot of people, to a certain extent, what has helped at this time is embracing the kind of more popcorn-y elements that we like. So yes, it might just be I want to sit and read romance novels for an hour, and I to a certain extent the perfect ideal is if you can combine your creativity and your popcorn quote-unquote consumption into one thing. Hey, I'm playing this game that also lets me make a game. That's great. But to a certain extent, it's just sometimes it's just a case of I'm going to watch Outlander and tell myself that this will be meaningful later on. I don't know how, but it's what I need right now.
And I think I desperately want to escape that in a way, because I don't want to have to justify my like joy by saying this will be useful later, right?
Yeah.
Like I was listening to an episode of Freakonomics recently where they talk about places like Amsterdam and things are trying to move away from this growth model of economics where the cancerous constant growth shouldn't be the goal. I'm trying to like embody that, because remember how the millennial burnout article that came out last year or the year before was huge? Well, that's been percolating, and I'm like, and people have been talking about like burning out during COVID, and I'm like, I don't want to feel miserable. Like I live alone as well, right? My husband's in France in grad school, right? I live alone. Like this is not. I need to give myself permission to enjoy this thing without feeling that I am doing it for work. And cooking is one of those things. I'm going to make a 3-course dinner today because, bitch, no one can stop me, right?
Yeah, I'm resonating with a lot of what everybody is saying. Certainly, Sharang, what you said about shorter form being a lot easier to kind of get around in terms of creativity. Symantha, the what do I need to feel safe? The sort of like filling of space with productivity. And yeah, a lot of that is sort of why I carved out Fortnightly Fiction, which the form of that is that we essentially spend 2 weeks to make a very simple interactive fiction piece with like an upper end word count, something like 3,000 words or something. So it's something that a lot of people can do in a weekend. And for me, like that was what I needed to feel safe, because I have all of these really long-term projects. Like, I've been working on my PhD for 6 years and I'm sort of getting to the final stages, but it's a really long-term thing. And then starting a company, that's also this huge commitment and all of that. And so for me, it was that thing where time in the pandemic has just been, it's like on one hand, you blink and it's been 3 months. And on the other hand, like an individual day takes 20 years. So like I also was having this, I want to finish things in order to feel the sense of like completion and release that you feel when you finish something. But I'm in the middle of all these long-term projects that are taking all of my time, and it's so easy to just let them consume everything. So how do I carve out space and make it such that the creative things I'm producing are like, it's okay if they're not very good, because I only had 2,500 words to work with. Or like, and also trying to capture those constraints and the game jam format and all of these things just to like lower the bar a little bit for the entrants and people who've never made games before, but also for myself, because like, the first piece I made was sort of exploring some feelings I was having around family issues and stuff like that, and having an outlet for some of those sort of angstier emotions in the pandemic that I didn't have to worry about getting through a publisher or, folding into my 5-year projects or whatever. It was just really nice for me. So yeah, all of what you all are saying.
I feel like anytime you open yourself up to something you're not used to, or you do something that you don't do regularly, you kind of expand your perspective. Do you all feel the same way? Have you noticed that? Like Sharang, you were saying, I've opened myself up to romance. Symantha, you said, I discovered I'm really enjoying localizing these Japanese webcomics. Have you found that like your perspective is changing, and maybe you've gotten like brainstorming ideas that you didn't have before just because of the different media you were opening yourself up to?
Oh, for sure. My brain is coming up with different stories because within Japanese web novels, like, there are genre tropes that I have never run into in Western literature. And the writing structure is different. With Japanese web novels, it's very, very heavy focused on dialogue. And I love writing dialogue, and having to go in and put all the prose and description, like I always get dinged on that by my editor of like, we don't know what they look like. Like, it shouldn't matter. And in Japanese web novels, it's like they don't care. You can literally scroll through like 5 pages and it's just dialogue, and there's not even any tags. So you just have to infer who is speaking, and sometimes you get lost. And like then you look at like how high this story is rated and how many views it's got, and I'm like, well, damn, I could do this too. So that's definitely been really interesting, and like I said, just allowing myself to go, well, this is fun. Like, other people would think that this is like torture, but this is fun for me. And what does it matter what other people think? A weird reverse thing that I've been experiencing is allowing myself to not take in some content. I go on Netflix and I swear to God, I've rewatched Cells at Work like 50 times because that is like my happy, safe thing to have on TV because I know where it's going. I've already watched it 50 times. I don't have to worry about characters dying or horrific cliffhangers. Like, it's a safe thing versus like I still haven't watched the final 2 Avenger Endgame stuff, and I'm like, during COVID is not the time for me. I am not emotionally prepared for that. I'm gonna have to wait like another 2 years and say that that's okay, that is okay to not take in some new content as well, to not have to constantly be, oh, but I should be knowing what the current stuff is for the industry, and I have to stay on top of all the trends. It's like, well, no, you can stay on top of just what you like for right now. That's fine.
Yeah.
I really like that sentiment because all of us work in new media stuff, right? Where there's this thing of like, you need to know what's the newest. You need to always stay on top. Like, I'm a professor. I need to be able to, like, I was like, so yeah, like in BioShock, and my students looked at me blankly, and I'm like, BioShock? And then one of them was like, Professor, that came out when we were in middle school. And I'm like, oh my God. Right? Because for me, I'm like, oh yeah, that came out not that long ago, right?
Yeah.
So and it's funny because I don't play a lot of like FPS games, for example, and a lot of my video game students do because they're video gamers, and I'm a very particular kind of game designer, and I tell them at the start of class, right? I'm like, I'm not the kind of gamer you might imagine me to be. So there is this pressure, like you're saying, Symantha, and it's really cool because there's also things like in the RPG industry, I don't know if it's similar, but they're like, okay, have you watched this children's TV show yet? Have you watched this other children's TV show yet? You must watch all these children's TV shows. I'm like, dude, I don't want to just keep watching children's TV shows, right? So like, I haven't finished She-Ra yet. I haven't finished Dragon Prince yet. I like them. I watch them like once a week maybe, but I think, Symantha, you're right. Like, I've been giving myself permission to like not be caught up on everything. I decided not to finish Game of Thrones. I'm like, you know what? I'm not gonna finish the stupid thing. I've watched the 4 seasons, right? I watched the 4 seasons. I read on Wikipedia what happened in the end. Great. I'm done with that world now. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like eating. Like, just because you got this huge serving set in front of you, like at some point you're full. And yeah, it may taste good, but you don't have to keep eating until the plate is clean. Like, you can stop eating.
Yeah, absolutely. This is like so resonating with me because it's not even like that in terms of like, it's not just things that people tell you, oh, you should be watching this or you should be playing this. Sometimes it's even things that you yourself feel that you should be playing because you know you like it, but you're just not in the right like mindset for it. Like, so for me, my cross that I bear is like, anybody who knows me for 5 minutes will be like, that woman is way too big a fan of Final Fantasy VII for her own good. Too big a fan for Final Fantasy VII. And then so everyone's like, so you finished it like first week, right? And I'm like, no, I'm still like back on chapter 8. And part of it is just because like, I kind of want like time, like quiet time to sit and engage with it, as opposed to like, oh, I'm like catching it like, 2 hours like after 10 p.m. or I'm like putting it in between like this other project and this other project. So I've kind of, given myself that permission to just be like, it will be there when I like, I don't have to worry so much about spoilers because this game came out like 20, 30 years ago. Like, I've gotten a few spoilers, but they're the sorts that make me happy, and it's just like, okay, that's fine. It will be there when I'm like in, and if I want to play, because I think that's the thing, there's like so much for us to do, like both completely fun things and productive things, that I think there's almost this feeling of either you feel guilty that you can't do it all, or you'll do one of the things, but you'll be feeling guilty that you didn't do that other thing. So like, I'll be like, I'm playing Warcraft. I shouldn't be playing World of Warcraft. I should be playing Final Fantasy VII. But when it comes down to it, it's like, well, I'm in the mood to play I'm in the mood to play World of Warcraft right now, so I will? Sorry.
It's like they have feelings, every single one of the projects or things that I want to be learning or should be working on is a person or a friend. And if I don't work on it, then I've hurt its feelings. And so then I run into the situation of like, well, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, so I'm just going to sit here and do nothing for a while.
Yeah. Well, the worst part is
it's like a macro version of which Netflix movie should I watch now, right? And then for 1 hour you watch none of them.
Yeah, you just scrolled Netflix for an hour.
Yeah, or YouTube. Just, oh my God, I spent so much time on YouTube, and I'm like, this is time I could have been playing a video game. The worst part though about like the projects that have hurt feelings is when there's an actual editor behind that, because then you actually have to talk to your editor, and there aren't actual hurt feelings, but there's that feeling of, oh no, my editor's going to look at me and be like, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed.
When you are looking to learn something new, everybody's brains work differently. We learn in different ways, and there's just so much content. We've been talking about content. There's just so much stuff that you can find, different tutorials, different videos, different wikis. How exactly do you evaluate a learning source to know that it's going to be helpful for you?
I do not.
You don't?
Yeah, I rely 100% on recommendations from people I know, honestly.
I rely on recommendations. A big part of like, if they let me see the beginning of the content for free, like here's the first lesson for free, you can watch that, then that'll help me because I can get a feel for, oh, okay, this is how they're like language, like this is how they talk about a thing, because if they talk about a thing in a way that does not make sense to me, this is not going to work. So I can start to get a feel for it that way. And then sometimes it's a money issue. Like, how much does this cost? Is this within my price range? Or, oh, this does look like really good content and it costs a lot of money. I do want to do it. So since I put money down, I have to do it. Like, I can't not do the thing. Like, there's so many Skillshare or free YouTube videos out there that, yeah, you get lost. It's like, well, which one do I pick? Well, I already paid X amount of money for that class over there, so I'm not even going to look at YouTube and all the really cool shit there. I'm gonna do that class that I put money down for, because they're not going to give me my money back. I'm getting my money's worth. So that's part of it for me, but that's like recognizing and like being able to put money down versus like when money is tight and I still want to learn something. Yeah, it's a challenge. It's definitely is a challenge to juggle. I think it's like, I have a rule though where it's like 5 clicks. Like you can go 5 clicks down the Google rabbit hole and then like you have to cut yourself off. So sometimes setting up rules like that.
Yeah. I think a lot depends on like what kind of learning like someone wants to do, because like, for example, like I've been watching a lot of tutorial videos for things like for dreams, where that will be sort of, it's much more contained tutorial. So it'll be like, how do you do a cloudy sky with God rays or something like that? And it's a very contained concept. So, and in those cases, I'll be blunt, sometimes it's just, oh, it's 5 minutes. I'm willing to spend 5 minutes, as opposed to it's 20 minutes. Oh, they're probably going to be like, like talking about their channel for the first 5 minutes. Oh, skip it. By the way, 20-minute YouTube creators out there, I really do love your work. I'm just extremely easily distracted. But in terms of like longer term stuff, like I will say that if I didn't have this book and I didn't have the interactive fiction, I didn't have any of all of this other stuff, just general day work going on, I would probably before COVID hit, I actually purchased a whole ton of classes on sale at I think, was it
Udemy? Yeah.
Udemy, yeah. And like I absolutely would be like would have really liked to have like kind of start settling into those on a kind of a day-by-day basis, and like being able, I think like for me, something where you're able to learn at your own pace is really important. And of course, and that's with a lot of YouTube tutorials and a lot of online classes, you can do that, but with a lot of things you can't. So some people like that fact of like, I need to learn this by a certain date, and other people really like there's a full class here and I need to take it in order, but I can take it as slow or as fast as I want. So I think that's like a big part for me. And also visual aids good.
For me, that take it, as slow as you want thing is, I think, one of my biggest challenges. I work best with deadlines. So during COVID, I have no deadlines for anything, and all of these personal projects have no deadlines. So there's all the time in the world to work on them, which means they never get worked on. So one of the things that I've started recently was I reached out to a friend and I was like, I need like a creativity coach. And she's like, I don't know what that is. I'm like, you're going to, because you're going to be my creativity coach. And it's a creativity accountability partner. We check in once a week and it's like, okay, here are the goals that I want to be working on. And she knows my big project, that one thing that I'm like working towards is doing a webcomic, is having the skills to do a webcomic. So picking that one big project, having a friend who knows that that is the goal, it helps me wade through all the clutter. Because if I start watching a class and I'm not really into it, I don't really feel like I'm getting what I need from it, I can bail out of that class. Is this going to help me learn how to draw anatomy better? No? Okay, well, I'm out. Is this the style they're teaching? Is this something that I'm into or not? No? Okay, well, here's this really beautiful oil landscape painting tutorial. Well, I'm not going to do that. I want to learn how to draw like an anime face. So sometimes, yeah, that's a thing that helps, is pick a big project and have somebody who can help you stay accountable, and then also help you not overwhelm yourself. Like if your goal is to write a poetry book, don't have your goals be like, I'm going to write 15 poems a day and I'm going to revise like 20 of them like this week. Like that's not really probably real. I mean, maybe you can do it, but maybe that's not realistic. So like maybe it's like you're going to write one poem this week and like maybe revise 3. Like know what's actually achievable for you, and then if you manage that, like then you can add a little bit more. Don't overwhelm yourself to begin with, because then you've already set yourself up to feel like a failure. Start baby steps.
For me, I am the more senses engaged, the easier it is for me to learn. So like I can pick up things if I read it, but it's really not going to stick. So I need to see and hear and also be doing what I'm seeing and hearing. So Michelle mentioned Udemy. I tend to binge flash sales and buy 2 or 3 courses at a time when they're like $11.99 or less. And Symantha was mentioning that you can preview the video, so you can get a sense for that instructor's teaching style. How much content do they have in a video? What visual aids do they use? Does the way they explain things make sense? You can do that for Udemy courses. You can do that for YouTube. So I would preview things first to see if you are in the flow with that instructor, and if you're clicking with that instructor. But also, several of you are collaborating, and that what did you call it? The creative accountability coach is really, really cool. And we've all worked in games, so we're used to collaborating with people. But there might be some people watching who are not used to collaborating, and they might be thinking, well, maybe I want to take on a project where I do need to collaborate with someone. Why is collaborating helpful? And during this time specifically, because we really can't meet in person as much, how have you been using different platforms? What platforms have you been using to collaborate with other people?
Well, the accountability thing, I think, comes from me being raised Catholic, so guilt is a big motivator for me. But yeah, seriously, like I don't want to waste their time. So if I have set up this 1-hour weekly call with somebody who is a friend, who I care about, who is also very busy and dealing with their own stuff, and I log in every week to be like, yeah, I didn't do anything. I didn't read that chapter of that book, or I didn't watch that tutorial, I didn't do that practice exercise, I didn't do any of the stuff that we said last week, then I've wasted their time. And as friendly as she is, like, I wasted her time. So I don't want to waste her time. So even if it's like the night before our call and I'm suddenly like, oh my God, I've got to do all that stuff. Like I said, I work well under deadlines. So the stuff gets done. That works for me.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that I like set up artificial 2-week deadlines for myself. I think so. To bring it back around to some of the questions, before the pandemic, the last team I worked with was an entirely remote indie studio, and you would think that means that the collaboration going from that to things of the pandemic would transfer pretty well one-to-one. But that actually hasn't been the case, because now a lot of the people that I'm collaborating with have, kids at home who are suddenly all up in their face, or, or they have just other external factors, and people's lives are just a lot less predictable than they used to be. So where previously at our remote studio, we would all sort of like passively sit on a Zoom call all day to mirror like a regular office. That's not really possible with the team that I'm currently working with. So it's a lot more sort of like scheduling check-ins to have some of that accountability that you're talking about, Symantha. And then I think there's also like different levels of collaboration and collaborating in different ways. So like the way I collaborate with my indie team is really different than, for example, how I interface with people in the community that we're building around Fortnightly Fiction. And so with that, there's a Discord server, and a lot of people sort of in their heads have an idea of the thing they want to build. And then they'll just reach out to people for help with like, oh, hey, I'm in Twine and I'm trying to code this thing and it's not really working. And other people jump in and they say, oh, I have that experience. Let me, and they'll just kind of jump into a channel, work out their thing. And then like, that's it. That's the extent of their collaboration. But that's a really real collaboration. And so I think there's, at least for me, when I was starting in game dev, I had this idea of like, when you're making a game, you've got to build a team, and that's like the only way to make a game. And I think increasingly the industry on a macro level, but certainly on small projects, it's totally fine to like have your thing, collaborate with somebody on a small part of that, whatever, where you meet up on that, and then kind of disperse to another area.
I think also it's important. Just real quick, personality. Like
totally.
My creativity coach friend, I picked her specifically because I was like, her personality, it's going to be like she's going to wrap me in like cotton candy bubble of like safety and like support. Whereas another friend that I have, that she was like, oh, you should pick this other girl. She'd be awesome. I'm like, I don't need like a military drill sergeant. She's going to break me. I'm fragile right now. I'm glass. So know what kind of personality you want to work with and you need to work with. And if you find yourself working with the wrong personality, it's okay to be like, oh yeah, this isn't working.
I think Stacy's point about how during the pandemic, working with other people remotely is not the same as working with people remotely before the pandemic is really important. And I think I want to use the word synergy, but I want to use the opposite, like not greater than the sum of its parts. Everything is worse than the sum of its parts, right? It's not that we can one-to-one translate to I was working here, now I'm working here. No, because there's a huge psychological toll that the state of the world is taking on us, right? If you're in the US context, for example, there's a very significant election coming up that is very important, right? If you're in the British context, what is happening with your economic situation now? Like, we still haven't had Brexit happen, right? So there's a lot going on in the world that in conjunction with the pandemic is taking a big toll, right? And so we can't expect ourselves to work as well as we did before. And so one of the big things of collaboration is also division of labor, right? You can be like this weekend, Cleo is talking to our illustrator for the Strange Horizons project, and I said, I can't do that this weekend. I'm recording four gajillion panels this weekend, but I'm going to talk to our stretch goal writer next week to bring her on board, and you don't have to be on that, right? And she's like, great, awesome, right? So division of labor has always been an important part of collaboration because your mind can only hold so much. But I think now, when everything is just literally more difficult to do, right? Literally everything is more difficult to do. Having that thing that, oh, I don't have to worry about this, you do deal with this, has been very helpful and cool. That is, of course, kind of based on Samantha's point that you have someone reliable, and the word reliable has come to be very charged during COVID, because one can be reliable, but other people should understand that, again, everything is harder to do, so cut people slack. Like my undergrads for spring semester, I was like, whatever, I don't really care when they're going to hand in homework now, unless they hand it in when I can't grade it anymore because the semester's over. I didn't tell them that, but I'm like, I'm not going to penalize that because reliable is something different. So keeping all that in mind, collaborations are good for that. And also just to stop yourself from feeling isolated. Working with someone else is going to stop, even if you don't live alone, right? You might live with people, but seeing other people is important. You can't just see the person you live with all the time. So division of labor and socializing are great effects of these collaborative projects.
Yes, and that really quickly. Also, division of labor, but also having somebody that complements you, both in terms of skill set and perspective. Because it's like, obviously, when you're dividing that labor, you want people who, like, that's their thing and they're really good at it. And so you doubly don't have to worry about it. And additionally, bringing in additional perspectives. I think a lot of times there's an impetus to seek out teams that are like yourself. But not only will you have a stronger product, but you'll probably have a surprisingly better working relationship if you find people that complement you both in your perspective and your skills.
Mm-hmm. So we've got about 4.5 minutes left.
Okay.
Is anyone thinking about learning anything else or taking on another project during this time that you have not tackled yet? And what would that be?
Well, as I said, I would love to spend more time tooling around in Dreams or in Udemy and learning something. But one thing I did want to comment, which is sort of off topic, but I think maybe deserve touching on, and that is a lot of this depends on what our day-to-day work creative stuff is, because one of the things I've been kind of struggling with is I've seen so many creatives that there's this kind of feeling of, well, I'm getting to do my creative work, and there's this sort of feeling of, but we don't count the work for hire creativity. That's creativity for somebody else. And it's something that I actually struggle with a lot, because I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not being creative at all. I'm just writing 20 million barks for this game, and then I'm doing the outline for this game. But part of, I guess, the process has been realizing that that, even though that's not necessarily my personal project, that is still creativity, and it can still be fulfilling. I can still come at the end of a week of writing barks and be like, man, I kicked the butt out of those barks. That was amazing. And so to a certain extent, that has given me a little bit more permission that, maybe I'm not doing as many personal projects or as personal learning as I could be. But that's okay, because I'm getting fulfillment out of the sort of day job work that I'm doing, and I've still got enough energy to do the book and some of the other projects. And at the end of the day, if that means that all I've got left is some World of Warcraft and some Fall Guys in me, that's okay. It's fine. It's really fine.
And I want to extend that to non-creative or non-artistic work as well, right? Because we know this, right? Economically, we have historically relegated, quote, women's work, end quote, right? The labor of keeping your household up to that's not work, right? So like I said, right, I am cleaning a lot less than normal because I'm feeling depressed all the time, right? So the days I'm I cleaned today, that's that was a thing I did that I needed to do, and that is an achievement, because we often don't do that.
Yeah.
Oh, I definitely write down on my daily list. I list out everything I do. I did the laundry. I took out the recycle. I put that down that's an achievement, because it is. I had to walk outside.
I will actually say, I really like, Symantha, what you were saying about, doing your kind of, little writing note, because I think even just those little details of, what are we doing to make the space we're in, if we're stuck in this space, what are we doing to make that space, more livable? And that in itself is creative. I mean, in terms of, super simple things, we've got this beautiful, deck area, and all I did was I bought, a couple of cheap solar lights on, wherever, and I put them up, and I don't know what, we don't think of that as creative, but it gives that same sort of wow, I'm really happy to be in this space, and I was able to make that space work for me and work for my family. And I think absolutely, just those little things like that can be really fulfilling. And I want to see your writing nook sometime.
I'll do like a Zoom call with you.
Yeah.
We've got about 30 seconds left. Anybody want to add any other pearls of wisdom?
It's going to be okay.
Support indie creators and artists.
Take care of yourselves.
Yeah, look for small acts of self-care that you can do.
And it's okay to say that you need help. That's fine. We're all vulnerable right now, so. All right, well, thank you so much, panelists. It was a fantastic discussion, and I hope all of you viewing enjoyed it, and that you are feeling more productive when you need to be. Don't feel like you have to be. But again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.